So we are on Daf Pei Amud Aleph. We are discussing how to do Shituf Mavo'ot, meaning how if we're in a courtyard and we want to join it together, all the surrounding courtyards into one large Shituf. So what do we need to do in order for that to work? So the Mishnah mentioned that the person takes the large barrel of all the food and then the zakah for everybody else, meaning he takes possession of the items on behalf of everybody else, so that everybody else is jointly involved in this venture, and therefore they're all considered to be partners. So now we're going to be questioning that. We are a couple of lines down where it says Meitvei. So Meitvei. Ketzad mishtatfin b'mavoi. So how do you do shituf mavoot? Mevi'in chavit shel yayin v'shel shemen v'shel tmarim v'shel grogrot v'shel sh'ar b'nei perot. So how do we do shituf mavoot? So we take a barrel full of either wine or oil or dates or fig cakes or any other type of fruit, and then all right. So that's where the food is going to be housed for the shituf mavoot, and the food has some foods that are eligible foods for shituf mavoot. And then we say if this barrel happens to be his own personal barrel and not currently owned by everybody, then he has to do zikui. He has to confer the rights to everybody else such that they can be part of the Eruvin. But if it's, let's say, already a joint venture between amongst everybody, he has to let them know that he's using it for this purpose, that he's taking the joint our food stores, and he's using it to make a shituf mavoot. So umagbia mina karka mashu, and then it also says that you raise it from the ground a little bit. So right, so then now we're questioning. Earlier the Mishnah had mentioned that it has to be a tefach. So how much is it? So by mashu, not mina kamar tefach. So when we said that it has to lift it off the ground a little bit. So the answer is, when they said mashu, they meant a tefach. So they both agree, no problems. So itmar, it was stated earlier, shitufei mavoot. So the question of, now we get the question of, do you really do this thing called zechia? Do you need to transfer by means of another person in order to get the rights to everybody else in your courtyard? So we stated by shitufei mavoot that Rav Amar ain't tzarich lazakot, Shmuel Amar tzarich lazakot. So Rav says you don't need to be mezakah, whereas Shmuel says you does. You do. Eruv tchumen Rav Amar tzarich lazakot, Shmuel Amar ain't tzarich lazakot. So notably here, you notice how the positions reverse in the middle. All right. Initially, Rav says you don't need to do zechia for shituf mavoot, whereas Shmuel says you does, and for Eruv tchum, which is if somebody's placing the food and have somebody else, so you have to have done an act of zikui in the process, right? So Rav says you would need, if it's not you but for somebody else, you have to have done zikui on their behalf, whereas Shmuel says you don't. So now we're trying to figure out what's the reasoning behind each of them. Bishlam al Shmuel hachatanan v'hachalotanan. This makes sense according to Shmuel, because this is stated in the Mishnah here, and that's stated in the Mishnah there. So one's talking about by one. So right, so that's how you defend Shmuel, because our Mishnah, it says that you need to be zakah by shituf mavoot, and also we've got a Mishnah by Erev Tchumen saying that you don't need to, like as I mentioned there. So that's why Shmuel says what he says. El Rav my tama. So then what's the logic behind Rav's opinion? Why does he have the exact opposite that seems to go against the Mishnah each time? So Tanai, it's actually Machloket Tanaim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Maaseh bechalato shel Rabbi Yoshia shehalcha lebeit merchatz b'chashkala ve'irva la chamota. So this is subject to dispute. So one time Rabbi Yehuda said in Rav that there was a case where the daughter-in-law of Rabbi Oshaya went to the bathhouse right before Shabbos, or sometime in Friday afternoon, and then it became dark, and then her mother-in-law made a Erev Tchumen on her behalf. So Uva Maseh Lifnei Rabbi Chia Vasar, and then this case came before Rabbi Chia and said that she's not allowed to return back from the bathhouse. Amrlo Rabbi because the bathhouse is located outside the Tchum. You could this air via Zikui for somebody outside of the Tchum doesn't work. So now we're trying to figure out why didn't it work. So Amrlo Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi Mablai Kol Katamach Rabbi Eruvin. So Rabbi Yishmael and then Rabbi Yossi said to Rabbi Chia, it says why is Mach Rabbi Eruvin, like let them do it. So Kach Amar Abba. So Rabbi Chia responded back, Kol sheyesh l'chal hakel be'eruvin l'hakel. Sorry, this is within the same statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Wherever you should be making, you should be making. Like, why are you being machmir for them? Like, if there's any opinion that says that she could make it back, why are you gonna make her sit on Shabbos in the bathhouse? This doesn't seem like the way anybody should spend their Shabbos, right? Let them come home for Shabbos. So then the question was. Now the question is the story. So why did Rabbi Chia say no? V'bailu mishal chamota irvala umishum lo zichtala or dilma mishala irvala umishum d'shalom midata. So the question is, what was the problem? Was the problem that it was the mother-in-law's food and she had it done zikoi to the daughter-in-law, or is it because she did it with the food that belonged to the daughter-in-law, just she didn't tell her? And we'd say that in order for an eruv to work, you needed to have knowledge of it. So which one is it? So Amar Lahan Ahu Mirabanan. So one of the Chachamim of Rabbi Yaakov Shmei, named Rabbi Yaakov, it said it as follows: L'didi mefarsh alei minei Rabbi Yochanan mishal chamota erva umishum delo zichtala. So it was taught to me that by Rabbi Yochanan that the issue was that the eruv belonged to the mother-in-law and she forgot to do zikui, therefore it didn't work. So Amar Lei Rabbi Zeir Rabbi Yaakov braid about Yaakov. Ki matitatam akif v'zil sulma detzor ubayamine Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. So then Rabbi Zeir told Rabbi Yaakov, we go to Israel, don't go straight to where you're trying to go to. Make sure you go to sulma detzor and ask Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi what his thoughts are on this on that case. So ba'amine, so he went and he asked Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. Mishal chamota erva umishum lo zichtala odilma mishala erva umishum d'shalo midata. Right. So what's the problem? Is it that the mother-in-law forgot to do zikui, or is it that the daughter didn't know it's happening but she already had owned the item? Which is the problem here? So Amar Lei mishum chamota erva la umishum lo zichtala. So Rabbi Yaakov says the issue is that there was no zikui done in that case. That's why it didn't work. So, okay, so that's that. And so again, so you need to do zikui. There's a question amongst Rishonim: is it always you do zikui, or is it the case for mavoi, or in this case in Eretz Chumin, or just because here we're worried about the mother-in-law messing? We normally don't trust mother-in-laws in relation to daughter-in-laws because they often there's often some breakage in there, and some they hate each other. Maybe they're trying to undermine each other in some way. So it's not looking as to whether or not that applies always for Eretz Chumin, or is it just in the case of the mother-in-law. Okay. So now that we've mentioned that, now we're going to go into in general the rest of Eruvin, and Shitufot and Shituf, and which ones require zikui and which ones don't require zikui. Why, when, where, why, and how. Okay. This is the primary discussion of zikui. And we would like to hear a much longer discussion on it. This was the last Ian shir I gave when I was still in Kol English on Eruvin, right before I came here. So if you want to hear more about it, I've got more, but I'll try and I'll throw as much as I can while I give the daf today. So Amar Rav Nachman, Nachdinan echad erevei tchumin ve'echad erevei chaterot echad shitefei mevuot tzarich l'zakot. Rav Nachman said, erev tchumin, erev chaterot, and shituf for all of those. If the items aren't already belonging to every single person, you need to do zechia on their behalf. You need to make sure that they have control, possession over the item as well. I'm using the term zechia because that's simply the best translation and less clunky, but that's what it means. Make sure that everybody has a portion and control over the item and rights to use it. So by Rav Nachman, eruvei tavshilin tzarich l'zakot or in tzarich l'zakot. So now we've concluded that for all eruvin that you need to do zechia, that you need to lift it up in order for it to work. So now that that's the case, How about Erev Tavshilin? Because Erev Tavshilin is different, right? Erev Tavshilin is supposed to, as opposed to the rest of the Eruvin, which tend to work based on we're partners in some regard, or in regards to the house. And Erev Tavshilin is purely based on is more based on Heker and the fact that so that you don't end up making any, so that way that allows you to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. That's Erev Tavshilin allows you from Yom Tov to Shabbos by either reminding that that's a form of Heker about the fact that you're not you're really not supposed to do that. You're not doing this for the week. You're doing it for Shabbos, and or of course it means that way just because you're doing it basically just because I'm doing it now. Like who knows? Maybe maybe all my neighbors will stop by for dinner tonight, and I need to make sure, like in this afternoon, like half an hour before on the way to shul, and want to have a snack, and I need to have enough food ready. So again, whichever reason you say Erev Tavshilin works. So the question is, as part of that, you have to do Zakam, have everybody else is going to be included in your Erev Tavshilin. We do Erev Tavshilin. So Amar Yosef, Mighty Baile. What's the question? Lo Shmiya Leila Hada Amar Nachman Bar Ada Bar Amar Shmuel Erev Tavshilin Tzrichil Zakot. Didn't you hear what Rav Nachman said to him Shmuel? You have to. So like, there's not much to discuss now, is there? So Amar Le'Abaye Pshita the Lo Shmiya. Well then, obviously he didn't hear it. So Idish Shmiya Mighty Baile, because if he'd heard that explicit statement saying that you're supposed to, then you wouldn't have asked the question. So Amar Le Atu Erev. So okay, so therefore we conclude that you need that for Erev Tavshilin, you needed a zikui, and that's actually included in the text of the Erev Tavshilin that you say. If you look at this in the Siddur, it not only says for yourself, it also says for Kol Bnei Iri. So as in if you are making the Erev not just for your household and you're wanting to say your neighbors as well, you would be required to then have somebody else with, well, be it your wife or one of your adult children or a neighbor, lift it on the rest of their behalf. I actually did this past over the last time we did our Erev. Last time this was relevant. I think that must have been on, what's that? Shavuos. Yeah, I think it was Shavuos the last time this was relevant, and then I did it and it was fun that I got to actually do it after learning it. It was fun. Anyways, so Amar Le Atu Erev Tchumen. Now that we mentioned Erev Tchumen, so do you or don't you? So Milo Amar Shmuel and Sarich Lazakot for Amar Ihu Sarich Lazakot. Wait a minute, like so. We concluded Rav Nachman's statement says that you need to do zikui, but Shmuel said you didn't. So like, how did Rav Nachman just ignore Shmuel and go with Rav? Like, what happened there? Do you need zikui or not? So, here's what it is. So, Ishlamahata Bligi Rav Shmuel the Kamash Malang Chumen Demar Chumen Demar Valacha Yihit Deshmiele Mika Demand. So you're right. When we first heard Rav and Shmuel, you just said maybe you should do the chumras in both cases. But here, if you actually heard what Shmuel said, why are you disputing that? Like, which one is it? Like, shouldn't you have simply followed Shmuel? Like, why would you have changed the opinion to be the case that everybody has to zikui if Shmuel says otherwise? So now we're gonna get to the. So now we've got an interesting story that'll hopefully get us to get us closer to the conclusion. So Ahu Torzina Dahava Bishivute Rabbi. There was a non-Jewish superintendent that lived in Rabbi Zer's neighborhood. Then Amr Le Ugur Lan Rishutach. Then he said, "Please rent us your space." And he wouldn't let him rent his space to him, which led to the problem of now they can't carry in the courtyard. So Atuka made Rabbi Zera Amrulay, Mahu Megar Mendivitu. So they asked, well, can I instead rent it out from his wife? Amarlu, back to him, Hafi Amar Resh Lakish, Mishmei Gavarab. Here's what I heard of Resh Lakish quoting the name of a great man, Umanu, and who's this great man? Rabbi Chanina. That a man's wife is able to make an Erev on his behalf, even if he doesn't know about it. So, which imply that even though that the non-Jew isn't there, you could rent it out from his wife, and that would work too. So Hahu Terzina Dehava B'Shavuta de Rav Yehuda Bar Ashia. We had another issue of another non-Jewish superintendent by Rav Yehuda Bar Ashia this time. Amarle Oger Lan Rashutach. He says, rent us your space. He said, nope. Atu Lakamed Rav Yehuda Bar Ashia. Amarle Mahu Lemegel Medvitu. So then they went to ask Rav Yehuda Bar Ashia, what should we do? Come rent for his wife. And he's like, I don't know. Atu Lakamed Rav Matna. That's Rav Matna. He said, I don't know. Atu Lakamed Rav Yehuda. Amarle Haski Amar Shmuel Ishto Shaladam Arevet Shlomidato. So they went and they checked and they asked. It turns out that a woman can make an eruv on her husband's behalf without his knowledge. So it's very good that if you hear it, I don't know. It's important to keep looking. It's happened before. Also, you got a shaila. You're like, one rabbi says I don't know, but maybe you should go ask the next guy, and then you follow the chain. You'll get there eventually. It might take a little extra time, but it's worth it for the answer at the end of the day. So that's what happened here. They got their answer. They were able to make their eruv. They were different from the wife. All's well. Beit. So now we've got a problem. We've got an objection based on the following Beit. Nashim she'irvu v'nishtatu shalomidat ba'alein ein ervan eruv v'ein sheyuvan shituf. A woman who makes an eruv or did a shituf v'ot on behalf of her husband without her husband's knowledge, the eruv isn't an eruv and the shituf is not a shituf. So this implies the exact opposite of what we stated above. So lo kasha, haj asar, haj lo asar. Now that's not the case. The question is, did the husband explicitly say no to the wife? If the answer is he explicitly said no, then that's a problem, and she can't do it. But if he knows nothing and she just does it anyways, then that's fine. So not recommended to do things without your spouse knowing, but sometimes if it's for their own good, it might be worth it. So Hakinami Mistavra, the Im Kain Kasha Dishmuel, right? This also makes sense because if not, then we've got a problem with the Dishmuel himself. Why? Damar Shmuel, Echab ibn Mavoy, Sharagil Hishatef ibn Mavoy, Lonish Tatef, ibn Mavoy, Nichmas al Tok Beito, Nolan Shidufami Menabal Karso. So good thing you mentioned that case as a yes versus a no, because we mentioned that if somebody had normally been part of the Shitum of Vavot, and then all of a sudden he decided he doesn't want to be part of it, people in the Mavoy are allowed to go in and take what they want from his house in order to make the Shitum work. So therefore, so seemingly there is some degree of coercion available even against Dahat. But also notably, he did not say the words no. He didn't bring the food, but he didn't say no. So they can still go ahead and take the food out of his house, and that's fine. Ragil in, she'ein, ragil lo, shamina. Right? The Gemara infers that this is only because he normally does. Are they allowed to do this? But otherwise, if you didn't normally join in, you can't simply start, say, I want an eruv, and then then you go around town with your thugs and start stealing everybody's food, and then say, see, you've been eruv now. It's like, no, you can't do that. It only works if he had been joining the previous couple of weeks. All of a sudden he stops. That's when you can forcibly include him. Lema Messiah, Kofinoto, Lasso, Lachinakor Lamavoy. So this, well, we got another right to support the whole forcing. If we can force somebody to put up a Lachi and a Kor and a Mavoy to allow everybody to carry there. No. Shani Hatam to Lake Mechitza. No, that's a different thing. There, the question is you're trying to force him to be part of putting up a wall. It's not the same as taking somebody's food. The two separate things. Or make him go in on putting, a little board and a little cross across the top isn't a big deal. But maybe that taking this amount of food is a little bit harder to do because that's a lot, right? Because once we're building a doorway, again, that's even more easily justifiable than the sheet to move out, which is a little bit less necessary.
Assumes that people kept their doors open.
I mean, locks back then weren't necessarily so sturdy, and not everybody had them. So yes, we have discussions in Eruvin that we'll see about using the use of the locks, but it seems like most people didn't really have locks because and it's a reason you only lock your house if you have stuff that's like worth stealing, right? But if you're basically poor and living week to week, like there really isn't like when you're gonna steal the guy's loaf of bread, that's just you're a despicable person. Like that's like it's not like it would not so okay. Most people didn't have locks. Some of the richer people did. For how those locks look, we will get there when we get to that part of the Gemara, and then I'll show you some nice pictures of old Roman locks. If you look at them, you're like, I can't believe this actually kicked anybody out. And the answer is it probably really didn't keep anybody out. So, yeah. Okay. So, Lishna Achrina Mitzad Shani. Alternatively, it's different. The case of an Eruv, because it's not talking about like a structural fix to the Eruv. Therefore, we'll let it slide. Meaning that this here, sorry, we'll make you fix up the air, like fix up the walls of your courtyard. It doesn't need to be in good shape. So for safety reasons. So therefore we can lump in Lech and Korah as part of that. But for the Eruv, it's like you could say, like, I don't think we'll be fine not carrying this week. We'll just carry in our own homes and it'll be fine. And then not much you could say to argue about that one. Okay, so Itmar, Rachia, Barashi, Amar, Ostin, Lachi, Ashera. Rachia, son of Ashi, said, you can use a Lachi made out of Ashera. Right? Ashera is a tree that's used for Avodah Zarah, or a tree that is worshipped as an Avodah Zarah. This is something that has to be burned and is required to be destroyed, yet you're allowed to use it for a Lachi. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Amar, Ostin, Korah, Ashera. Shimon Lakish says you could even use the crossbeam made out of wood from an Avodah Zarah tree. So if you're allowed to use it for the crossbeam, of course you use it for the side post. Right? So we're saying it works for the Lech and not necessarily for the Korah, because we said that the Korah works because of the Chitza, of P-Tikra, your Besotem, that we put the beam across the top. That's because it's as if you're closing it off and making a wall. On the other hand, when you are doing the Lech, it's Mishum Heker, so as in that, maybe that might not be the same. So that if you can use a wall that has to be burnt down counts as a wall, then of course to recognize something's there, the Lech, that's much we need much less. But if you say that it's good for the Lech, which is only for recognition, then you wouldn't necessarily say the same thing applies for the Korah, which is meant to be a wall. Okay.
What's the reason why it's not considered Hana from Avodah Zarah?
It's not considered enough from Avodah Zarah because that's a good question. The answer is because it's a structural thing, which you're not technically using for anything else, and you say that as if it has currently been burned to ashes where it stands, and therefore it's not really being used. As in, you're right. It should be. It ordinarily would be, but because you're not technically not getting any benefit from it, because this structural thing that you're doing here isn't considered to be benefit, because it's halachic benefit, not necessarily true benefit.
There's no benefit.
Basically, it's considered to be no benefit. Is the answer? Is that you're considered not being any benefit from the? You're not considered not getting benefit from the physical status of the Asherah. You're getting benefit from either from the burnt out charred remains if it's already been burnt, or you're getting benefit out of the atomized remains, which is the way that the Eri puts it. I mean, the blood broken into many little pieces. You view it as if currently you've already destroyed it, and then so therefore it's as if you're not, because you don't need the actual structure. It's like so you treat it as if you already like halachically burned it. So therefore there's no more issue of getting any benefit because it's already been burned, even though it's there. It's a little weird, but that's kind of how it goes.
Okay.
Make sense? Ish. Yeah. Right. So then, like the halachic problem, the halachic isser destroys it, and then but once it's destroyed, it's still usable, even though it's in pieces, and therefore we can still use it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird, but that's a good question. Question is better than the answer, but that's how it goes. Sorry. Okay, so again, now we're continuing on. We'll note it. So now we're continuing about the status of what to do, how to maintain our Eruv and how Zikui is working. So it's my ta'ochel mostly from mazaka ve'ein tzarich lodia. So let's say we mentioned there's a certain minimum amount of food you need. You get the amount of 2 meals per person. And if it drops below that number, Again, it's 2 meals per person, but once you've hit 18 people's worth, then you don't need anything more. That's why we have a. That's why we have the. That's why nowadays we just rely on a single box of matzahs for the whole eruv, and it works just fine. So again, if somebody had, let's say somebody, again, because everybody has rights to access the eruv. So let's say somebody to use the eruv or the sheet of food. So if it drops below the minimum amount, so. But then there's still some left, so you can be mosif and mazak. You can add from your own food and just put it in the pile, and then do Zichron on his behalf, and then it'll be kosher. And you don't need to tell anybody that you did this, because presumably everybody wants to be part of the eruv, and they're not changing their minds. You just make sure that the amount was proper, and we're good. You toast to aleihen mosif and mazaka v'tzarich lodia. But if there's more people who showed up, then you would need to add more food for the new people who showed up, and you would also need to do zikui, and you'd also need to tell them, because they might not want to have their portion of the eruv being given to being accessible to other people besides those who are currently there. So again, as we mentioned before, it's not it's because everybody's really, really poor, so it's not that they're being mean; they're just simply poor. So kamahu shiuran. So okay, so how much is the now we're finally getting to the amount of food you'll need per person. So how much is needed? Yeah, for sheet to move out. Bisman shein Eruvin mazon shtei sudot l'kulam. When there's many of them, then you need then 2 meals is sufficient to be able to see all of them for sheet to move out. Bisman shein muatin. When there's aren't that many people, you can scale it proportionally according to the grove garret, the kol echad v'echad. You only need the amount of a dried fig bowl for each one of them. Okay, so that's the amounts. Depends for sheet to move out. Depends on the amount of people, how much you're going to be eating total in the end. As far as the exact measurements thereof, we'll get to that for the precise measurements of how much that works out to be. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yossi, the Metzger Morim b'tchilat eruv, abal shiare eruv kolshu. So we mentioned these minimum amounts. This is saying how much you need to have, right? This means in order before Shabbos, I want to make eruv, I must have this minimum amount of food, right? Again, for everybody in the shita, if I would need 2 meals, or I would need just if there's aren't that many people, I would need only a dried fig milk. And that's that. So, but again, it's only for that number of how much you need is only at the start of Shabbos. But if there's any amount remaining, then on Shabbos, it's still, as long as there's the smallest amount left, it's still considered to be a valid eruv. We only said that if you've done a shita muvot, you have to make an eruv as well, in order to be so that the children don't forget that you need to make an eruv. So, okay. So now we're going to go back. We're going to be talking about how much food and how much is removed, and we're trying to figure out how that happens. So, but my eskinan. So, what is the case that you're adding food? So, ilema b'min echad my area, and it's mine. If you're saying it's all from one type of food, then why are we talking about the case where it drops below? A few kalanami. If you're saying it's so, then if it's only about one type of food, then if that whole food finished off, then like there's also no problem. Like, is that if the eruv was good before Shabbos, you ate the whole eruv, that's fine. It's like I don't understand what's the problem here. So elabish name meaning. So let's say there's two. Let's say your eruv has 2 types of foods that are listed in the Mishnah. Let's say you decided to use bread and wine for your shituf, or wine and oil. So a few nami. So even if it drops below, it's just namilo. If it drops below, use the amount. You still wouldn't be able to do anything without telling people. So like, well, I don't understand what are we learning from here? Tanya kala ochel mimin echad ein tzarich lodia mishnei ein tzarich lodia, because we mentioned there that there's 2 types of food. Another bright test. There's 2 types of food, and only one of them is finished. you don't need to tell anybody about the being finished, and the Eruv can still go on. You could add more food, not a problem. But if both foods had ran out, then you'll have to tell them because it's finished. So Ibaizema mimin echad. No, rather, so what is it? So some say that you're right. Mishnah could be talking about a case where there's one food or two foods. In both cases, we can have the same problem. Ibaizema mimin echad. Kumanit mait neat mat mate. Right. So either you could say it's from one or from two. And if we're saying about for one, what are we saying? But we say that it decreased. So we just say that it all disappeared. Right, because that would according to both opinions, we now have the problem of we don't have a kosher Eruv, and you need to add more for the Eruv for next week. So v'bainema, another option you could say for the case of two is mishneh meaning that there's two kalashani that is different. If one entirely food is entirely finished, that might affect the status of the Eruv, and that would lead to a problem. So therefore, that's why we're going to make them. We're going to make them have to add more, and you have to tell people about it. It's because once the whole type has run out, that's a big deal that you have to start taking more seriously. Okay. Right. If there's right, so if more people show up, then to the alleyway, more people move in, then you have to add more food and do zikui and tell everybody involved. So Amar Rav Shizbi, Amar Rav Chisda, Zod Omeret, Chalukin Alav, Chaverav Shlo Al Rabbi Yehuda. This means that Rabbi Yehuda's contemporaries argued with him. None. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Metzger, Morim, Be'er, Beit Chumen, Abal Be'er, Bechatzerot, Arvin Ben Badat, Vein Shlo Badat. So as Rabbi Yehuda stated, that the Eretz Chumen is the only case where you need to like tell people and get their knowledge and make sure you do zikui and all that. But in general, you can do it whether they know or not because it's always beneficial. Shita Dakalukin. So obviously that they disagree based on our Mishnah disagrees to say that you can't do that. So no. So Ma'adatema, Hani Mili B'Chatzer Sheben Shnei Mavo'ot Aval Chatzer Shamavo Echad Emalo. No, the reason why you need to have Rabbi Yehuda's opinion and this whole question because that may only apply if there's a courtyard between two mavois where it'll definitely benefit you. But you may have said if there's only one alleyway, then the benefit does not. Here, by the case where there's two alleyways, it could be detrimental potentially. Whereas one, it would definitely be right. It'll definitely help because you're going to have to use that courtyard. You're not making a choice. So I want to be part of this courtyard or that courtyard, this mavoy, that mavoy. Right here, there's no it can only be helpful. Before I can only use my courtyard. Now I can use my courtyard and the mavoy. Of course, it's beneficial. But if you let's say they're making you pick a direction, and you're like, I didn't want to go that way. I wanted to be with my other friends for Shabbos. Why make me go to those friends? So you may have thought that you wouldn't be allowed to do it if the guy had a choice beforehand, but now you limit his choice, even if you overall give him more area. Kamash Malan, that whenever you do an Eruv Chatzerot, it is for the person's benefit, and therefore he does not need to tell him according to Yehuda, whereas the Mishnah says you have to explain to him anyways because you're still utilizing his stuff. Okay, so now getting into the details of how much you need in terms of food and how that plays out for everything. Okay, so Kamahu Shiro. So how much you need for your Eruv? So Kamahu Meruvin, how many is many people? Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Shmona Esrei B'nei Adam. Many people is 18. So Chaim. So Shmona Esrei, but too low. 18 or no more. Ema Shmona Esrei B'Elef. So if you meant 18 plus, then why didn't it say 18 plus? So you're right. It should have said 18 and upwards. You're right. That's what it means. 18 and upwards, you only need the amount of food of 2 sudot. And that's all you need for your Eruv or your Shituf. So Umay Shmona Esrei. Wait, how do we get to number 18? Right, I know we know that 18 is a good Jewish number because Chai, but how's that helping us for here? So I'm Rav Yitzchak, Breder of Yehuda. I heard this from my father, Rav Yehuda. Kol shi'ilu machalkol umzon shtei sudot b'neihem ve'ein magak or geret l'kol chad v'achad hein merubin v'sagi mazon shtei sudot. Ve'ilo hein watininu. So it goes as follows: that we consider Mazur Shtei Sudot to be the the maximal amount we'll make you put into an Eruv. And so if you were to divide it up and you ended up getting and you can't even get a garret of each of it to each person, that means you have a lot of people. But if you could, therefore we're going to let you. Therefore, we're going to say the cap is 2 Sudot. But if you don't have that, if you don't have enough, but if you have more people, if you have less people than 18, and therefore they'll each get more than garret's worth, that means you have a few people, and you have to make sure that there's enough per person. Which again allows for it's a kula because it means that you could use less than the Mazur Shtei Sudot, but again you still need to make sure that you have that amount. Okay, v'agav orche kamash malan dishtei sudot havyan shmona esrei grogro. And Yehuda also teaches by in a roundabout way that the amount of 2 meals is also equivalent to the amount of 18 growth, 18 dried figs, and that is the minimum amount of food you would need for making your Eruv. As far as what you can use for making your Eruv and your Shituf, that is going to be tomorrow's discussion. Okay, so now let's sum up what we covered today because we covered quite a bit of ground as well as topics. So we started off. We started off with where we mentioned in passing yesterday about being mizakeh, the food for another person. Meaning that if you want to make an Eruv for somebody else, you have to lift the Eruv up off the ground at tefach in order for the other people to be able to have a right in the food. If everybody contributed their amount, they wouldn't need to. But if not, and somebody else who doesn't know about it, you would have to be mizakeh on their behalf. So then we went to discussion when you need to do Zichron versus not. There initially was a between Shituf Mavo'ot versus Eruv Tchumen between Rav and Shmuel. We ended up concluding in today that everything that's got the word Eruv in it requires you to do Zichron for it, whether that be an Eruv Tchumen, again expanding your boundary, Eruv Hatzera, combining courtyards, Shituf Mavo'ot, combining alleyways, or even Eruv Tavshilin, which is allow you to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. For all of those, you need to use Zikui to confer the usage of said item on everybody who's going to be involved. And again, we do this as well. And then the next Mishnah mentioned. Then we have the case of the mother-in-law doing it for daughter-in-law. We said it's an issue that she didn't know about it, or it's the issue that she didn't do Zichron. We included the issue she didn't do Zichron. We discussed the case of renting from the non-Jew who didn't want to rent to you, but renting from his wife instead, and saying that works because the wife is able to do them on his behalf. We also mentioned that in general it works as long as he didn't expressly tell his wife, no, don't you dare do this. So therefore, then make sure you get to the wife before the husband does, and make sure that she agrees before he can say give you a hard no, because you don't want it, because that's going to be difficult. Again, whether or not that's a good idea in terms of way to have relationships, I'm not going to comment. But yeah, so again, we mentioned that because we've been mentioning multiple times that in general, that when you're doing a shituf or an Eruv, you collect from everybody, and people are very particular about what the usage is for their food because they are poor and they're planning and often are planning on eating that part that they just did shituf or Eruv with right then in that Shabbos. They don't want outsiders coming in. So therefore, if it decreases, if a person wants to make it good for everybody else, they can do mizakeh on everybody's behalf, and that's fine. But if some new people show up, then you're going to have to tell everybody, make sure that everybody is still okay with it. But nowadays, what we do in order to solve that issue is we have the Rav of the town has an Eruv on behalf of everybody. Does Zikui to another individual in the community, says on behalf of everybody who's in the community or whoever will ever come to the community from here until next Pesach, because normally they do it on Erev Pesach when they set the Eruv. So say from this Pesach, from now until next Pesach, anybody who comes is included, all guests, all family members who have been born, not been born, etc. Right? Every person who show up is included, and I'm lifting up and again, the last mission we had talked about the minimum amount of food that you need. right? Against the amount of Mother's Day Sudo can cover everybody. So that's why, so then he takes that amount and he does it. That way it doesn't matter how many people show up, they're all covered, they're all included, and I'm being a Zak on their behalf. That way you will not, that way you don't run into any issues of somebody changing their minds or anything else in the middle. Or if let's say, or anything else going on, because now we're currently all covered, we're all currently part of it, and nobody can have any complaints if you took my food, because the answer is it already was everybody's food. And also means to correlate this is that if somebody happens to be short on Lechem Mishnah, they should know that they are allowed to go to the, if you only have one, you only find yourself, you only remember to buy, you only have one, like it's Shal Shudas, you only have one call and you want to use two, you're welcome to go to the shul, where the Eruvin is housed, and to take one of the matzahs. Just you probably should tell somebody because they're going to have to replace that by the next Shabbos.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, my pleasure.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah.
Good day.
Have a great day.